Spider-Man's spider sensibility might just be the most inconsistent power of all time. Now, this isn't a diss to Spider-Man or any writers or anything, but I wanted to make this video because there's actually been a lot of discussion on the topic. People are discussing how Spider-Man's spider sense doesn't work sometimes or this or that, myself included. I made a video a while back about how Peter was nerfed in Marvel Spider-Man 2, and one argument I brought up was the spider sense inconsistency. It's just a thing that happens in all Spider-Man media, not just the games, but like the comics as well, movies, TV shows, everywhere else. This video is going to look at examples from the most recent popular Spider-Man thing that came out, which is Marvel Spider-Man 2. But keep in mind, this isn't a diss to game at all really or anything, because like I said, this happens everywhere with Spider-Man. And the thing is, can you really blame the writers? Can you just imagine how much of a pain in the ass writing the spider sense is into everything? It just wouldn't make for great storytelling maybe, because if it were written consistently all the time, it would be like maybe a lot of fights wouldn't even be fights kind of thing, because Peter would just dodge everything. Before we get into it, I'm trying to get 1,000 followers before the end of 2024, so if you guys can follow me on Twitter, it would mean the world to me. I post updates and discuss more superhero stuff there, so please go ahead and follow me on there. Links in the description as well. Really appreciate it. Let's keep it pushing. So, to do some research on this, I looked up how spider sense works exactly, and like that was difficult in itself, believe it or not. I thought it would be easy, but like not really. A lot of people say the same thing, where it's like the writers make it however they want it to, or it's never been consistent across all mediums. The general consensus of spider sense is that it warns Peter of danger before it happens. But what does that entice? Like, is it immediate danger right before it hits him, or like way before it gets to that point? I never really put too much thought into it, but like now I am, since I'm making this video. How does it work exactly? I've read some things where it slows down time for him, essentially letting him pick the best option, or in a fight it tells him the best move he should take. According to Google, and Google never lies, spider sense can give Peter around a few seconds to a higher span of time to react. Basically, spider sense is overpowered. It gives Peter basically the possibility of just never getting hit. It's why we see him always jumping around and dodging attacks, because his spider sense allows that. So, spider sense is OP, right? So why do we always see Peter getting beat up often? Shouldn't spider sense realistically have him dodge every attack? Well, yes, but also no. You see, just because he has this OP ability that theoretically lets Peter know every attack that comes his way, doesn't mean he will. Peter is still a human, he's gonna get hit, he makes mistakes. It's not set in stone, it doesn't make him invincible. That's not the reason I necessarily think the spider sense is inconsistent in some shape or form. The thing with spider sense is, as OP as it is, writers can get away with kind of forgetting about it a lot. Just to compare, think of power scaling among people with enhanced strength, right? Like when someone that's physically powerful loses to someone they probably shouldn't. People are going to notice that quicker because it's a lot more blatant or obvious. Like, for example, I watched this Batman movie where Deathstroke and Batman's son, Damian, were fighting, and Damian actually beat Deathstroke. Now, in my opinion, Damian should not have beaten Deathstroke at all. That's not right. An example like that is just physically apparent, and it makes it harder for writers to write stuff like that in a way where they make someone strong lose to someone they shouldn't, because people like me will call them out on their BS. Now, spider sense, on the other hand, isn't like a physical thing. It's just a tingly feeling Peter gets in his head that we see sometimes. If the writers are showing Spider-Man fight someone and Peter gets hit, we often just kind of go with it because spider sense isn't really shown there. You see what I'm saying? It's just easier for a writer to make spider sense inconsistent because you can get away with not having to incorporate it at all times. And sometimes it may be done purposely, and sometimes it's not. The Dark Knight Rises was the weakest of the trilogy, but also I see a spider sense topic everywhere where someone says spider sense should have saved Spider-Man here, blah blah blah, and I'm one of those people. I say the same thing. So, to show you guys some visual examples, I'm going to go through Marvel Spider-Man 2, because it's easy to show examples that are animated, and it's more entertaining, I think, than showing like a comic book or something, right? And I think this game is kind of guilty in showing the inconsistency and the spider sensibility as well. So, I'm going to pick out some examples from the games, or games actually. I'm going to show an example or two from the first game as well, and I'll just go in depth with each. Okay, so Insomniac's Spider-Man. I want to start off with showing what I think is a great example of the use of spider sense, which is in the first game at the ceremony for Miles' dad. His spider sense goes off when the demons are setting up bombs around the area. His sense here goes off and gives him a lot of time before the bombs actually go off. Although Peter ultimately didn't prevent the crime, it's not the point. there's a substantial amount of time here that allowed him to react and try to figure out what's going on. As you can see here, he has time to walk through this crowd and all that before the bombs actually go off. Now, in the same game, his senses go off a little later at times, like for example, versus this crane coming at him or versus these corrupt cops trying to kill him. Now, I think this is fine. There's no real threats until they actually come up, which is right before attacking Spider-Man in these two particular scenes. Okay, cool, that's great. I think overall, Spider Sense was done really well in the first game. That being said, there are still some scenes that make no sense. The biggest one that comes to mind is the Scorpion section where Peter looks for him in this area here. How in the world is Peter's senses not exploding right now with Scorpion legit right behind him? Somebody explain that to me. So, while Spider-Man 1 for the most part had good uses of the ability, there are just glaringly bad ones like this one I just showed you. Now, let's go to Marvel Spider-Man 2, where I think it gets inconsistent on Peter in these sections. Now, I used this example before, but like this hand here from Sandman that smacks Peter onto the ground, wouldn't his spider sense warn him about something like this? It's a pretty big threat from Sandman that's taking a little long to get to Peter to hit him, and Peter still gets hit. I know Peter's a human, and he can always still take a hit, but this seems a little bit more out of reach for me. The thing with spider sense is, I know it warns him of danger, but how exactly? Does it warn him of attacks mid-fight? It should, right? So like, let's say Spider-Man's fighting like Scorpion, and they're just throwing punch for punch. Does spider sense warn him of every single individual punch he throws, so Peter can react to each individual one? Because I'm pretty sure that's how spider sense is explained, and if that's the case, this attack should be avoided. But maybe Insomniac's spider sense works differently in that it doesn't do that. Maybe it warns him of incoming danger, and once Peter gets a hold of that, it doesn't work for him throughout the fight? I feel like that's wrong though. Or how about this situation here, where Kraven stabbed him? Shouldn't his spider sense warn him about the immediate knife that could kill him? You could argue that, like I said, kind of. His spider sense warns him of the danger, which in this case would be Kraven, but not of the specific attack of the knife that would kill him. But is that really how spider sense works? I don't think so. When you get to the nitty and gritty like I am, you start to think about stuff like this. Of course, you could just chalk it up to that Spider-Man just made a human mistake here and he got hit because he made that human mistake, which I think is also a valid reason, and it could be used. But nonetheless, people are going to question it like I am right now. There's also just small questionable scenarios too, such as this mission on the ship. The metal birds that are introduced attacking Peter's senses don't go off on the random surprise attacks they managed to hit him with. It's like, why are his senses not going off at all? It just seems odd to me. Or how about this scene with the giant henchman that attacks Peter? His senses don't go off here either, and Peter just takes his hit without any warning. Granted, it's supposed to be a funnier scene, so this is like the most nitpicking I'll probably do in this video, but I mean, you still see my point here, right? Now, here's a more questionable example from the game that I don't really have an explanation for. The church scene, where Spider-Man enters a church to look for Kraven, in which Kraven then gets a bunch of surprise hits on Peter with Peter's spider sense not going off at all. Now, it actually goes off right here to dodge a knife that Kraven throws at Peter, so cool. That's a good example, and it establishes that his senses aren't affected by the symbiote, if that for some reason would be a factor for some people. But right after, Kraven gets a surprise drop on him like 3 times, and Peter is looking around helplessly as if he doesn't have his spider sense. Now this tripped me up at first because like, okay, how did Kraven do that? How is Peter's spider sense not going off on any of these attacks? Is this not a spider sense situation one-on-one? Peter walking around slowly being careful about danger, and then danger coming at him, but his sense just doesn't go off? We don't see the tingle effect outside of that knife. It's just weird. Does Kraven have some sort of potion or something that allows him to be immune to spider sense? If he does, it's not explained in the game, nor is that really a thing from the comics as far as I'm aware. If it is, I apologize, I guess it maybe would be a specific story or something that I'm not aware of. And with that knife throw triggering Peter's sense, I just have to assume that Kraven is not immune to the spider sense, and it's just not working here. I know it's a suspenseful moment, but I think they could have showed his senses going off and it would still play out the same. They still could have had Kraven attack him, I guess. But without it triggering, now it's like, okay, it just doesn't add up. And keep in mind, I'm not expecting Peter to never get hit. He's not Ultra Instinct, I get that. But this is one of those situations where the writing itself is just inconsistent. I think it's a clear-cut example of the Spidey sense just being just being inconsistent. There might be an explanation I'm missing, but it just doesn't seem right to me. Or how about this example, where Peter's investigating the underground lab to find the lizard, and while he does, the lizard is literally stalking him, and Peter's senses don't go off until right before he gets hit, giving him no time to react. Shouldn't his spider senses have warned him about a giant monster with sharp claws like 10 feet away from him? In this particular example, there's nothing Peter could have done to react. If the lizard were to stab him with his claws, Peter had like no time to react to that. The point of spider sense was useless here. It was more like you're gonna get hit here rather than there's a danger present. Here's your ample amount of time to react. This is a situation where I feel you can write it to make a little bit more sense. Like Pete's senses go off. He's looking around the room for a bit and then still gets hit by a lizard. That could make more sense. I'm not asking for Peter to never get hit. That's just not reasonable. He's gonna get hit. I'm asking for it to just be written a little better. But with that being said, the Insomniac games have had a lot of times where the spider sense is used really well, and I'm not gonna gloss over that. In fact, I think it's used really well a lot more times than it's not. It's just that spider sense is difficult to write. I get that. It seems you always have to kind of nerf it to write an engaging story. It just feels like that. But even so, it doesn't excuse the fact that's going to make it inconsistent, right? You just can't deny it. But okay, let's step back from the games. I told you that spider sense is written differently per writer. I know I said I'm just going to use the games for examples, but I just lied to you, so, take that as you will. The Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 42 in 2018. The story is basically about how Peter's spider senses warn him about the most mundane things, like his alarm going off, a slippery rug, dust bunnies, watch out for gingivitis. The story was more humorous and shows a little bit more insight on the spider sense, but you can see how it's written differently, right? I bring this comic up because of that. People want to write it differently, and that's awesome. I think that's fine. But the thing with spider sense is, at the end of the day, it's something you can make inconsistent and less people will question it due to how subtle of a power it can be. It's not something apparent like super strength and how one person with it can beat somebody else. Rather, spider sense is a unique concept. There aren't many other characters like it unless you're like another spider person, I guess. And the point of its abilities are just kind of difficult to write, so writers unintentionally or intentionally just kind of forego it, which I honestly understand. Like I said, it's a pain in the ass to write around. But even so, I think rewriting specific scenes like some that I mentioned would make it so it's a little bit more consistent, because at the end of the day, I feel like no matter how you write spider sense, there's always going to be some natural inconsistencies, so it's best to just make it as less so as possible. And in doing research for this video, the general consensus online is that it's really inconsistent. I guess I'm not the only one. But with knowing this, I guess it's better than other powers being inconsistent, right? Because spider sense not working how we expect it to, okay, it doesn't take me away from the story completely, personally. Things like if Batman's son beats Deathstroke in a 1v1 fight like I said, yeah, that takes me out of a story and it's really inconsistent. Spidey's spider sense not working one particular scene though, not so much. But it happens so often that I think deserves the spot of being the most inconsistent superpower. Maybe there's another power out there that's just as inconsistent, but maybe there isn't. Spider-Man's such a popular character and there's so many different versions of him that it increases those odds with the spider sense being difficult to write with. Maybe the Flash and his speed are the most inconsistent, because that gets really inconsistent at times. That's honestly a good contender, but I still think spider sense takes the cake. Maybe someone out there has some kind of list of all the inconsistencies of superheroes or something. Sounds difficult, but yeah. With Spider-Man being one of the most popular superheroes though, my bet is on spider sense being the most inconsistent. But yes, to sum it all up, spider sense has been known historically to be very, very inconsistent, but it's not really a bad thing if you don't overthink it, I guess. It's always up to the writer's interpretation of how the ability works, and sometimes you just have to write it a certain way to make the story more interesting. But what do you think? Do you agree? Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm handsome? Do you think there's something else out there more inconsistent than spider sense? Let me know. And as always, I really appreciate any support for the video. Follow me on Twitter, please. Trying to hit 1K followers before the end of 2024, like I said. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next video. Stay safe and peace.